Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a great lunch.
Bu güzel öğle arasından sonra bir sonraki panelimize geçme
Of good practices in education. This time it's from Syria, named Supporting Social and Emotional Development in School Culture. Let's have a look.
نقوم في ثانوية العلوم والتكنولوجيا بنشاطات متنوعة لدمج الطلاب مع بيئتهم وثقافتهم. ففي السنة الأولى قام أستاذ اللغة التركية بإعطاء درس نموذجي حول البيئة وأهميتها والاعتناء بها.
9. sınıf öğrencilerimizle kültür dersi kapsamında
We have talked about a different topic every week as a part of the topic. This week's topic was environment, about plastic waste, recycling, and the life of living creatures in nature other than us. As a result of this class, we decided to make bird feeders from plastic waste. The idea of making bird feeders with the plastic bottles we had accumulated came to life from our minds. We cut plastic bottles, turned them into bird trees, and hung them on the trees in our school. We had opportunity to provide food to birds due to the season. At the end of this, we were able to recycle some items and make use of them. They beautifully planted in different colors, and we used tires. We took tires from the tire shop, planted flowers, and distributed them in the school garden. I was very excited to do this project with our friends. The most exciting part for me during the project was the team spirit of the students, and they were all about helping animals. The students benefited from this activity in two ways. Firstly, by correct pronunciation of Turkish, and secondly, by working collaboratively in the implementation of the activities around them. With this study, our students were able to learn the words they learned in Turkish lessons in the daily life and realized the words in the same meaning, and they increased their sensitivity to the environment. They learned teamwork and cooperative work, and they took a step forward towards becoming a virtuous person with the motivation to protect the environment and people. These activities that were carried out showed us the importance of the study, and our children transferred their experiences to the environment. Other students also benefited greatly from this. They tried to apply these experiences continuously in the following years. While we were doing this project, I was very happy that we were helping the birds and making our school better. A person feels proud when he transforms into something that is beneficial to the environment. That is how I felt. I felt so proud when I turned the bottle into a place to feed the birds, because we helped the animals and we gave them food, and we turned the waste into something useful in our daily lives. Not all heroes wear capes. Trying is the basis of success. We need to realize the importance of peer solidarity and cooperation between teachers, students, and staff in order for the school to continue in the best way possible. Not only humans, but also living creatures have the right to live in the world. If I am always consuming, I will run out. But if I recycle, I witness nature whispering things in my ear.
Watching this video is the fact that education environment and social dynamics, they vary from countries to regions, and it is not an easy task to maintain basic standards in fragile environments, but Marif teachers know how to deal with such challenges.
Right, they are doing that. They're teaching Marif students to be sensitive to the world that they live in and to think about their environment and everything that's part of that environment. This is part of their school culture to develop the social and emotional skills of all of the Marif students. And remember, as said in that video by student Abdurrazak, not all heroes wear capes.
Indeed, and certainly Marif students are heroes without capes. So ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for our keynote speech, and the topic is one that I am personally very interested in. Lately, artificial intelligence has become a household name. It is almost in every industry in the world right now. Talk about defense, technology, artificial intelligence is there, and one of those industries is certainly education. And to talk about artificial intelligence in the age of education, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Charles Fadel, founder and chairman, Center for Curriculum Redesign. Mr. Fadel is a global education thought leader, futurist, and inventor, member of OECD AI Experts group, co-author of Artificial Intelligence in Education, Four-Dimensional Education, and best-selling 21st Century Skills. He has worked with education systems and institutions in more than 30 countries and has spent 25 years in technology management. That's very impressive, Mr. Fadel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's start with this then.
Beni davet ettiğiniz için teşekkür ederim.
We would like to invite you we would like to thank you for inviting us.
But sadly, this also illustrates a point that we'll get to in a moment when we talk about jobs. So thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the agenda. This is what we're going to talk about. I would like to talk to you about AI to demystify some of what you've been hearing in the past year or so, and start talking about what knowledge, what competencies we need, and of course, finish on how do we teach differently. A quick introduction about my center. Basically, we try to be ahead of the pack, think ahead so that we have time to prepare. Because as you know, public sector is relatively slow to adapt. Education is particularly slow to adapt. And so we really have to give you time to make that adjustment. And this time the adjustment is complicated. You'll see in a moment. My center works with a number of NGOs like the OECD and the IB, but also a number of high-ranking PISA jurisdictions and universities and so on. Here are the PISA jurisdictions we work with, the very high achievers. Because it's one thing to achieve highly on PISA, it's another to know what to do next. Sometimes your success becomes your box. And one of the things I appreciate about the Turkey Maharish Foundation is that you have the latitude to innovate more than many others who already have a lot of systems in place. So that's an advantage you should build on. When I wrote 21st Century Skills, it became a moniker used worldwide. And that's great, because now every country understands the need to teach knowledge, but also skills and character and meta-learning. Wonderful. And as I started my center a bit more than a decade ago, I moved into talking even more about the character dimension, the knowledge dimension, and so on. Here we go. The full framework, I'll show you in detail in a moment. The full framework has been kindly translated by a very dear colleague, Dilek Duman, and she's translated in Turkish for some of you, and it's available also in many of your languages, meaning French and Arabic and so on. Actually, it's available in 23 languages, so you have a likelihood of finding what you want. We put great effort into developing the framework because it's very easy to talk about big words like creativity, critical thinking, curiosity, but you need to be precise in the definitions, and you have to make sure that those definitions are not overlapping. So we did a lot of analysis to prove that these 60 sub-competencies are as orthogonal as possible. They're not overlapping. That was critical. Anyone who works in computer science knows how important an ontology is. Well, that's our ontology here. The disappointing part, though, is that in spite of all of this work, when we did the survey with Brookings recently, we found that no jurisdiction, not even Singapore, not even whatever, choose your high-end jurisdiction, offers pedagogy or assessments of these competencies. And that's a problem, of course, because if it's not measured, it's not taught. If it's not taught to the teachers, it's not going to happen in the classroom. So we've been developing ways to deal with this. Now let's take a step back and let's talk about jobs in light of AI. Very briefly, because this is not an economists' conference. I want to mention one thing that is really important. Every time you see out of GPT-4 or anyone what AI is capable of doing nowadays, you'll see that people say, wow, it can pass this medical test, it can pass the SATs, it can pass legal tests. But first of all, this is highlighting the fact that a lot of our tests are about memorization, number one. And so, first of all, the tests themselves need to be changed. If it's just about memorization, I can memorize a lot out of the devices I have. It doesn't mean knowledge is not important. It means you have to dose it properly. Second, just because you can do a test doesn't mean you can do a task. There's probably a factor of 10 in complexity between a test and a task. Otherwise, it would be easy. Anyone who graduates knows exactly how to do in their job. That's not the case. I mean, we have, even in the US, lawyers who graduate without ever having written a law contract. They know the theory of law, they've never written a contract. And then, the task to the job. A lawyer's job, a doctor's job is more than a single task. And there's probably another factor of 10 between that and the tasks, and another factor 10, of course, with the tests. So, when you hear the hype out there saying, oh my God, all the jobs are going to disappear, keep this in mind. Now, when I spoke to you in Turkish, thanks to the translator here, this is something I have to say to our wonderful colleague translators. The problem you have is that your job is mostly a task, and that makes you more, it puts you more in danger than jobs that have multiplicities of tasks with glue in between them. But it's rare to have jobs that are focused on just one task. Even driving, you're not only driving on a flat roads, straightforward. You're driving at the Place de l'Étoile at rush hour in Paris. You know what that means. It's a mess. So let's not take this too far. However, when you see that GPT-4 can answer 75% of math questions in the case of exponentials in mathematics, and in the case of game theory, 90% of the questions, you ask yourself, okay, we need to rethink the tests, and we need to rethink exactly what the comprehension is of the students. But again, tests is not equal to task, is not equal to jobs. What we're not saying is you don't need to know anything anymore. On the contrary, we're saying you have to sophisticate your understanding. So this is basically the consequence of all this. We're not going to be in a situation where AI replaces us for quite a while, but it's like any new technology, it's an amplifier. You can decide to use the amplifier to help yourself, or refuse it, and then you're left behind. I'm sure when the wheel or the car were invented, there were always people saying, you know what, I prefer to walk. Fine, it's your choice. But I'll be able to go faster, carry heavier loads over longer distances. Okay, let me take you through a brief look at the history of technology. The good thing today is that we had two panels, one talking about history, one talking about technology. I'm going to bring the two together. First of all, I've been around for a while. So I started an AI company on neural networks back in 1989. Of course, that shows you how old I am. But the benefit of it is I've been through cycles. I've seen how things progress, and they're never just a straight progression. You have this issue of punctuated equilibria. And now we've seen, in the past couple of decades, we've seen the 2010s with machine learning, and I'll explain what that is in a second, and now we've seen generative AI and large language models. But that's already starting to peak. Even if there's a GPT-5, given that Sam Altman just got fired, we'll see. Even if there is one, it's not going to be massively better than GPT-4. So in all these technologies, you see a ramp up from GPT-2, not good, GPT-3 and a half, wow, GPT-4, wow, and then GPT-5, okay. So it's normal to see this kind of situation. And that's hard for technologists because everyone is wedded to the technology they have developed. So those in the 80s were wedded, married, if you prefer. They were married to a type of AI called symbolic. And for them, nothing else mattered. Nothing else was going to work. They failed. The new generation now working with machine learning and neural networks, they say, oh, my algorithm will do everything. They're going to fail as well. It's going to do amazing new things, but not everything. So this is what we've seen with machine learning. The game tree complexity is enormous. Look at this, 10 to the power of 535, so 10 with 535 zeros. No human mind can compute this, and so these machines can win in highly computing intensive situations. AlphaFold, how do you fold proteins? How proteins fold on themselves. Well, that's also a very complicated problem, but you can automate that now once you know the rules. So they can compute millions of protein foldings in an instant. But they're greedy. They need an enormous amount of data. Just AlphaGo to play Go, it would have taken us 6,800 years to learn as much as it did. We don't have that kind of time. They're also very brittle. They break easily. For them, these two things are a face because they recognize features of a face, but they don't understand the real world. They don't have an internal concept of the real world. So for them, these are faces. We know better. They mistake a robin and a cheetah just on the basis of very, very few pixels that you can hardly see. They confuse a stop sign with a speed limit just on basis of a few stickers. They don't have a concept of the real world, they're just recognizers. It doesn't mean you cannot do amazing things, it means it has limitations. And from there, you can see as you go into the LLM domain, how they can start to hallucinate, as was described earlier. So they're shallow. If you make them recognize a dog, they will see dogs everywhere. You see? They're recognizing dogs. Dogs everywhere. They don't see the difference. Again, dogs everywhere. That's what they do. So it depends on how you train them, how you tweak them. And so to train them and to tweak them, you have to present the data in a very nice way, very clean, whereas real life is a mess. So it has limitations. Then they're opaque. We have no idea how they actually work. This was said this morning. Yeah, we don't know how it works because you have 5,000 layers of neurons computing a face recognition. You have no idea at every single point what's happening. But that's how we recognize faces too. We don't know at every single point what's happening. It's okay, as long as it works. Remember, evolution has wired us to be functional and useful. It hasn't wired us to be super elegant. It worked. So but there was a major transition that happened recently, right? Back a year ago. What we started seeing was this change from machine learning systems to large language models. And with that, although they're based on the same types of algorithms, the fact that they're trained on immense data sets rather than narrow data sets like proteins or playing Go or chess, now it means that they can, quote unquote, understand from a much broader array of things. And so, whereas the other systems were bounded, as in engineering we call them bounded problems, now the boundary is much, much, much greater. They're still bounded, but immensely greater. And second, now you can connect these LLMs together via things like LangChain and API. Forgive me, translators, I don't have words for that. Call it LangChain and API. Basically, technologies that allow you to connect different data sets and different algorithms and different models. All of that now can be brought together. Okay. And this is really important because it removed the single approach barrier that we had seen before. Okay, how did we get here? This is the history of it. 1895, conditional probabilities with Markov. I'm sure the poor man had no idea that he was going to create this 100 years later. No idea. In 1948, Shannon wrote this wonderful paper on theory of communication, and this is what he wrote. This is really interesting. He looked at the frequency of appearance of letters in English, one after the other. You can do this in any language. And then he continued making it more and more complex. What's the likelihood of two letters showing together, like B and Ba? What's the likelihood of these two showing right next to each other? And then 3 letters and 4 letters and words. And that's what you end up with. Second order, third order, first order word approximation, second order word approximation. Look at the last paragraph. It's starting to resemble a real language, and he did this manually in 1948, okay? So you add 100 million times more processing power and, you know, 1 trillion words, and you come up with much better predictions. That's what happened. So these technologies were, in essence, started very, very long ago by people who had no idea where this was going to go. And in the meantime, of course, we invented the transistor. And we invented the integrated circuit. So what happened was that in 35 years, since I had, back in 89 when I had my AI company, we could compute 3 layers of neurons only. Cannot do anything with that. But with 5,000 layers, the world has changed. And we had a 100 million-fold improvement in processing power in the meantime. Makes a difference. And then you have people who say, well, it's going to be just my model. As I was saying earlier, just my algorithm will do everything. And I'm saying, no, that's not the case. You're going to have different types of algorithms all working together. But no, it's not going to come up to a single master algorithm. The same way that our brain has figured out, you don't have a single type of cortical structure, a single type of a brain area that does it all. It's really a combination of things that specialize in different domains, and that's how we're going to see emerge. So that's why all of the people who are saying, oh my God, LLMs are going to create this enormous change for everything, are wrong. They're simply saying this because they know LLMs best. That's how they spent 30 years of their career. And so for them, their baby is perfect. And I'm saying, sorry, it's beautiful, but it's not the only baby in the world. You're going to need others to get to this stage. That said, I don't want to minimize the stage we're in. This is amazing. This is an amazing moment. We have highly capable AI that's going to become even more capable because of all of these things that are all coming together. So let's not lose sight that even if they don't become general intelligence, they're highly capable. Okay, so that's the middle way. Neither are they useless, nor are they capable of being completely human. It's a middle way. Okay. So we're limited by our imagination, because when you asked a drawing cartoonist back in 1899 in France to draw things about year 2000, that's how he conceived a robot. In his imagination, all he could do was draw on the technologies that were available at the time. Mechanical engineering was the high tech of the time. So there's a mechanical contraption. There was no electronics, no small, cheap motors. So you had the maid pull the thing. That was the robot. he could never have imagined Roomba. But we're a bit in that situation now. So it's perfectly normal when people say, oh my God, we cannot imagine what's going to happen. Yeah, we can't. Okay, let's live with it. That's normal in the life of technology. There are plenty of unintended consequences that we cannot imagine. Let's be adaptable like we've always been as a species. And so that's why this is really the pattern. We expect things to change in a linear way, but that's not how they change. Think of the internet, for example, or iPhone or whatever. It starts very invisibly, it ramps up, and it starts saturating. Even if this whole curve is compressed in time, it's still an S-curve. So the problem is, this is moving a lot, still moving a lot faster than we can adapt, right? And so public policy is at the bottom, the slowest to adapt, and technology moves the fastest, and we have to run where the ball will be. That's what you do in football. That's normal operating procedure. But that's a tough thing to do. So if you look at the Bloom taxonomy, for example, that many of you as educators know about, well, in Bloom's taxonomy, you have software or applications that can deal with pretty much the whole stack. But let's be a little bit more precise, okay? Because everybody talks about these things in general terms. So let's play a little game. In your opinion, can an AI determine connections? So those who think it can, raise your hand. Can an AI determine connections? Raise your hand. Only a few? Okay. Can AI spot analogies? Okay. Can it predict outcomes? Okay. Can it handle exceptions? Can it deal with abstraction? No? Some? Yeah? Let's say, can it generalize reasonably? Sometimes. Can it be self-aware? Not quite. But you see, it's really always a question of sort of. I saw you discuss, some of you said sometimes. That's the nuance that you have to pay attention to. It's not, oh yeah, I can do these things. No, it's in what situation, what context, with what capabilities. Is it an image that you have to translate into words, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that straightforward. And same thing for the affective domain, right? It can do a lot of things. It cannot internalize emotions, but it can do a lot of things. Have you watched the Netflix series called Humans with an inverted A? It was a Swedish series that became translated in English called Humans. You have, some of you have. Well, in that series, remember how the little girl loves the robot better than her mother because the robot is infinitely patient? You know, we are parents and we get home and we have our little kid who wants to read the same story for the 50,000th time. And we're a bit tired and we're cranky. The robot, super patient. It is tireless. We are human, right? And of course, there's a psychomotor domain. We're more comfortable with that for some reason. We have giant trucks doing mining, and we're only afraid of the truck running on your foot, but you're not afraid of the truck replacing you. Although, if you think about it, the giant truck has replaced tens of thousands of people digging and shoveling. So somehow we have adapted. We are going to continue adapting. But there's a key durable consequence of all of this that I would like to highlight to you. This. It has no agency of its own. It has no purpose of its own. No meaning, exactly. So we are still driving AI response. That's great. But here's a question for you. I'm curious. Who among you thinks that AI already has an identity? Raise your hand if you think it has an identity. Timid hands, timid hands. Well, the timid hands are right. It has already 3 layers of identity. The first layer is how you train it, what data set. The data set colors what it says. So if you train it on a medical data set, it's going to answer medical questions. So it already has that level of identity. Second, you have the algorithm that you use. You can use different algorithms, it's going to respond different ways. That's an identity. It's like different people thinking in different ways. Third layer, and that's the crazy layer, agents. You can put an interface and have it converse to you in the way you want, a bit like Siri or some of these boxes. Yeah, so you can start talking to you with an angry voice, with a happy voice, with a whatever voice you want. And people now are going to be developing tons and tons of agents to put as interfaces. It's a bit like TikTok for LLMs. I don't know how great that's going to be. Okay, so what we have, of course, is this repeat of the situation we saw with the Industrial Revolution. Technology zoomed ahead during the Industrial Revolution. Now, with the digital revolution, technology is zooming ahead of education. So what did we do to adapt? We invented mass schooling. Okay, and now what do we have to do to adapt? We have to mass sophisticate. We have to rethink what we teach, and we have to rethink how we teach at both the teacher level and at the student level. So what we advocate for is a need for versatility. In all honesty, no one can tell you what's going to happen in a decade from now. Okay, we have some ideas, we try to be reasonable, but no one can tell really. So the same way you take an insurance policy, we think that the right insurance policy is to be multifaceted, be able to be a knife or a can opener or whatever. Depending on what life throws at you, you can be a poet or a painter or a physicist or a physician. Who knows? Okay? So we give you all the tools, and then you can refine the tools later as you need them. Which means we want a Renaissance sort of person, someone who's broad and deep, not one or the other. Someone capable of expertise and transfer, not one or the other. And I want to use this because this morning, one of the professors mentioned the need to teach everybody AI. And here's the nuance. It's not teach everyone AI as an algorithmic sort of thing. It's teach everyone about AI's capabilities. And that's very different because it's not the pathway of expertise, it's the pathway of transfer. It's what's called expert amateurism. I can teach you a concept without having to teach you the algorithmic side, the complex side of the concept. It's that simple. I'm going to show you an example. All right. Let's talk about knowledge. Like every domain in learning sciences, it's a mess. Everybody comes up with their own theory. Our role as a center is to figure out what is actually correct and not have an or mindset. Professor XYZ says it's my theory that's correct versus Professor XYZ says, no, it's mine. Here we say, look, there's truth in all of you, and we have to assemble it the right way. It's an and proposition. And so what is really coming out of all of this analysis is that we still have declarative knowledge, facts. We still need conceptual knowledge, concepts. We still need to learn the procedures, and we still need to learn the epistemics at the bottom, meaning how do you think like a mathematician? How do you think like a historian? It doesn't mean you want to become a mathematician. You want to understand their thought processes. So here's what core concepts are about. They're drivers. Everybody learned at school what an exponential is with a certain algebraic formulation. But we had a pandemic, and everybody reacted terribly around the world, very poorly, very slowly. Why? because they don't understand the concept. The concept behind an exponential is deceiving then explosive. But when have you ever had a math teacher who explained that to you? Right? They only explain the algebraic formulation, they don't explain what it means. And even if they explain what it means, you didn't keep it in your guts. It didn't resonate in you deeply. So next time you see an exponential, like global warming, you say, oh my God, I really need to react fast because I know the system is gaining momentum. And once it gains momentum, it's much harder to stop. And not by a factor of 10, it could be by a factor of 100 or 1,000. And that's the situation in which we are with global warming. And we just keep on wasting time. It's not linear, it's exponential. And our politics, our corporations, either do not understand or refuse to accept the need to act urgently. So again, we would have saved ourselves trillions of dollars with the pandemic had we stopped it really early. Same for all of you who are confronted to Zika or Ebola or SARS or whatever. So, the leaves are the essential content. That's what we typically teach. We need to teach the roots, the concepts. But we also need to modernize the disciplines themselves. Why do we teach so much trigonometry and so little statistics and probabilities? Why don't we teach world literature? Why don't we teach world history? As one of the professors was saying this morning, give people a better understanding of the planet they're on. Why don't we teach during performing arts not just theater, but debate and comedy and even improv? You know, be fast on your feet. That's what the world demands nowadays. That you'd be really, really, quick to react. Well, improv allows you to do that. It trains you to do that. How about teaching modern disciplines, like technology and engineering? Why not teach civil and mechanical and electrical, etc. engineering? I was an electrical engineer. I didn't want to be a computer scientist. At best, you get the option of learning computer science in high school. So what? There are plenty of other engineering disciplines I could have been interested in. And by the way, there's also biotech and clean tech and nanotech. Why does it have to be, again, only computer science? I understand, super important for everybody. But how about the rest? Well, because we have used up all the time for the old disciplines. So there's no time left. So we have to go back and cut out, which is extremely hard to do, as you all know. And then, so we keep talking about STEM, but it's really STM at best, small t. No social, we don't teach social sciences, and yet we need to understand ourselves and others. We don't teach entrepreneurship, and yet entrepreneurship is the job of the future. So we don't do the right things in what we teach. Of course, interdisciplinarity, like environmental literacy and digital literacy and so on. Digital literacy, right? It doesn't mean that everyone has to know how to code a machine learning system. It means you have to understand how to use it. It's different. And you have to learn via projects. Why? Right? We have all done projects, they've all stuck in our memory because they were engaging, motivating. And the real world is about projects. Life is about projects, and yet we don't do enough of them. And we can even line up the projects to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We can line it up to the World Economic Forum Deep Shift Technologies. So what we do with the projects have an interesting purpose. Okay. So what competencies? You're familiar with them already, creativity, critical thinking, etc., but also the aspect of character. curiosity, resilience, etc. When COVID happened, everybody just jumped and said, oh my God, the students have to be resilient. You don't teach that in 2 months. It's a journey that they're on from kindergarten onward. And that's not taught. And so people react and, sorry, it's too late now. You need to prepare ahead of time. It's like taking vitamins when you're pregnant. You know, you try to prevent issues. You don't want to show up after the fact. And then meta-learning. This is at a premium. If you agree with me that an AI is not self-conscious, it cannot reflect on itself very easily, well, that's our advantage, isn't it? Because we supposedly can. That should be taught. And that's, by the way, the highest return on your investment in education, by far. It's very cheap to implement. It gives you the highest return from a student perspective. And you can line up these competencies with the various disciplines. Not every discipline is as good as the others at developing them. The point here is to develop them deliberately, comprehensively, systematically, and demonstrably. Every teacher will say that, oh yeah, I teach critical thinking here and there. The point is to do it systematically and do it well. That's not easy. Now, above and beyond that, what you add to the framework is student personalization. The framework are the goals. We need to personalize for the students. We've always known that forever, right? However, we have distilled what it means. Remember how we talked about does a computer have identity, agency, and purpose? Well, there you go. This is the differentiation. Even if you had a technology that did absolutely everything for you, you still would want some sense of purpose for the student, some agency for the student, some motivation for the student. And that's where it comes together. So the agency changes over time. The younger student has less agency, the older student has more agency. That's normal. And your purpose has to incorporate all of these things together, right? What you love, that would be great. I love what I do, so I'm not working, really. Since I started doing this, I don't feel like I'm working. This is a passion. Is it what the world needs? Can I be paid for it, and can I be good at it? If you only tell the kid one of these 4 things or 2 of these 4 things, it's not enough. They really need all 4. Sorry, cameras, but I'm going to come down in the audience. So how do we teach with AI? All right, it's really augmenting our learning. It's how we teach better. It's hand in hand with the technology. So adaptive learning already had this promise because you can self-pace, right? So some people will learn more slowly than others, and you can self-pace their education. And AI can give you extra gains because they're a tutor. You're familiar with the 2 sigma problem. Now that can be your tutor. So you help the teacher, you help the student. You can minimize the overall time, and you can maximize the time to mastery for individual students. That's the promise. It's getting into reach now. And that opens a range of possibilities. What's the percentage, what's the ratio between what the teacher does and what the student does and everything in between, right? 100% teacher, 100% student, and you have all these modalities in between that we're gonna see. So it really opens amazing horizons. We're gonna be exploring a lot of this in the decade to come. It's fascinating. But we're limited in our imagination again. This was also done in 1899, and this is how they saw e-learning. Note that there was also a mechanical device that somehow generated current on the other side, which actually is not completely wrong. And here we are, my center, we have generated for the first time 1 million synthetic students. And the beauty of synthetic students is that you can run experiments on them without harming them, right? So my daughter does this in healthcare. They have, let's say, 50 real patients. and but they need 50,000 or 500,000 to run their analytics, and so they just create synthetic patients. So here we've created Learnoids, synthetic students, and on which we can refine our AI-based analytics. Plenty of fun. So to conclude, you see, a lot of disciplines go from being purely descriptive or qualitative to becoming more and more analytical. Think of biology. A few decades ago, a century ago, if you wanted to see the difference between species, you looked at beaks, you looked at feathers, etc. Now you do a DNA test. It's become a lot more analytical. What you're seeing here is the emergence of education engineering. Not engineering education, education engineering. The same way that you have civil, mechanical, electrical engineering, this is the birth of education engineering, where you become much more precise, much more specific, much more science-centric, engineering-centric in your processes to understand how to teach better. Okay? And with that, yes, a little bit of publicity. This and more will be available in January, a lot more. There's so many details. For example, for every single one of these competencies, which subcomponent is going to be resistant to AI, is going to be augmented by AI, is going to be harmed by AI. That's the analysis we're doing. And that's it. Thank you very much. So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So I have a question about the AI identity. They have 3 layers, how we learn it. So is it only these 3 layers that have AI, or that is more than 3, like ChatGPT? So is it only these 3 layers have, or is more than that?
So far, it's only these 3 layers. It does not have an internal identity of sorts. The only identity it has is what's given to it, right? So in psychology, or actually in early computer science, there was an experiment called ELIZA at MIT. And it showed that people are very, very prone to internalize these things as being human. It's called anthropomorphization. We anthropomorphize. We want to make these things human, but they're not. They're literally just an answering machine. And so the only identity it has is not an internal identity, is the identity of its data set, its algorithm, and its interface. It looks great. And because it looks great and it answers so well, I have infinite debates with my wife about whether they really have an identity, agency, and so on. Like, no, you're being fooled. It's called the ELIZA effect. ELIZA effect, look it up.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you so much. I will ask my question in Turkish. While we're talking about artificial intelligence and the characteristics of human being, we are trying to make AI do human characteristics. And we are irradiated as human being, and we will lose our characteristics, our features as human being, like intelligence. There will be some limitations because our partner will do that. We produced AI, and AI will act on our behalf. We are assigning AI to act on behalf of us. So if we don't use these features, these characteristics, then will we be weakened? So are we producing a new human model? Is it the objective? So this is my first question. And secondly,
I don't have the memory to remember. So AI will do better. AI does extremely well in memory and in computation. Humans are different. So, to answer your question, look, every time there's a new technology, there's new fear. It's very normal to be afraid. Evolution has wired us to be sensitive to fear. That's how we survive, right? It gave us pain receptors, it gave us fear receptors, because of how we survive. Courage and resilience are a way to transcend that fear. So I understand your reaction. That's normal. It's also good to have that kind of fear because you want to remain in control of the system. You don't want to give it full agency, full autonomy, and then it just decides to do whatever it wants to do. I agree with you. And that's why you've seen a lot of press about fears of AGI, fears of superintelligence. It's a good conversation to have, and it's exactly the sort of conversation we're having also at the OECD to put guidelines. That said, it's like for any technology, some bad actors can ignore the guidelines. So we have to be prepared too. Among ourselves, we probably do not have too many psychopaths, but there are psychopaths out there on Earth. And so we have to be mindful of our creations so that we don't give them access to anybody. So right now, the fear of it becoming self-conscious is negligible. It's not a real thing. It's literally just an algorithm. Over time, if we don't pay attention and if we have 2 or 3 more steps in sophistication, which are not predictable, we don't know when it's going to be able to assemble different algorithms. We have to do that. In other words, we have to take this neural network approach and put it together with the symbolic approach of the 80s and put it together with other types of algorithms like knowledge graphs and so on. We are in control of these evolutions, and it's up to us to be wise enough. And that's why one of the things you'll see in the book is a renewed call for wisdom as the ultimate goal of an education. That's what allows us to survive as a species. Be wise, which means constantly balancing things. What is the right dynamic equilibrium that we need to keep?
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you so much for the answer. Can I ask my second question now?
Şimdi yapay zeka ile
We are talking about AI and we are talking about ethics. So, and I think that there is a need for ethics in world literature, as you just said in the beginning. Well, this ethic should be constituted among the countries. Do you have any work or study on that? So, for the school curriculums, maybe there will be a common work altogether. Is it possible? Thank you.
There's a lot of work happening in the field of ethics and AI, a lot of work going on. What you may also have noticed in the framework we presented, we have the word ethics as one of the character qualities we need to have embedded in the curriculum. So this ethic happens just about everywhere. When you're studying history, or you're studying math, for example, you're studying algorithms in mathematics, you need to talk about the ethics of algorithms. That's a perfect opportunity to do that. So we're not saying it's one more course, we mean it's embedded everywhere. Same as environmental literacy and so on. So ethics has to be part of a normal curriculum embedded everywhere, happening constantly. Thank you.
Thank you for the challenge and clarity in your presentation. I'm to your left.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, you started by saying, I'm quoting here, sometimes your success becomes your box.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that a framework and competencies could become a box, could they become our box at some point or in some way?
Absolutely, they could. Actually, what the book will also reveal, Dilek, be mindful, the book will reveal that we're doing Rev 1.2 on the framework. Because of everything we've learned, we keep on improving the framework as we learn. We don't want it to be a box. However, there's also an aspect of diminishing returns that occurs until you get to the next jump point. So for us, the next jump point is the competencies you saw, refined as will be published, and adding the personalization angle of motivation, identity, agency, purpose. That was not in the original framework. So you see how once we start saturating one part of the recommendation, we realize there's a new part that's emerging, we jump on it. And that's what we'll continue doing. Also, there's an enormous amount of work that goes into creating these ontologies, seriously enormous. This is where perhaps we're more quantitative than many, but we're also qualitative in doing truth tables and things like that. So when we created the original framework, we looked at more than 100 frameworks around the world, from Thailand to Sweden to whatever. We assembled it all, we did natural language processing to decide which were the common ones and added a bit of logic. If we saw things that were overlapping, we said, well, there's an overlap that the system has not detected. We added value that way. So you start with the cleanest possible ontology, and like in anything in engineering, 80-20 rule works, and then you can keep on improving it as you gain more data. You realize as an academic that these sorts of things can be stuck in conversations for literally ever. You know, we can spend another 50 years debating whether to call something courage or bravery or whatever. You say, okay, fine, look, we really care about it being practical in the classroom, and these are the mechanisms that we think would work, and that's why I was asking you about your work being so interesting. Thank you. Other questions?
So you talk about adaptive learning, which is, you know, the teaching can be tailored depending on the student needs. So my question is about, is it possible that we can make, like also Khan Academy is doing something like that, you know, with Salkahan, and is it possible that we can have one universal curriculum, and if a student has the internet connection, can have that, can have chance to reach that platform, and then she or he can get a tailored education for that universal curriculum objectives?
Yes, the quick answer is yes. But first of all, there's a step function in having access, right? If you don't have access, you don't have electricity, if you don't have food, I mean, the base of the Maslow pyramid has to be met, okay? So if you don't have access to internet, you're stuck. Once you have that access, you have situations where you have no teachers, right? Plenty of countries, including the US, have a major deficit in teachers. So you can imagine scenarios where the student is taught by the AI, it's better than nothing. Right now, a student anywhere can go to MIT OpenCourseWare or Coursera or whatever to teach themselves. Well, that's a step beyond that, right? It's better than just going to a course. Now the course kind of comes to you and works with you. Okay. Then you have situations where I think we're going to be rethinking what actually is a teacher. Think of it like in the medical world. You have surgeons, you have specialists, you have generalists, you have nurses, you have physician's assistants. Well, perhaps in many, many situations, all you can have is a nurse. Well, then that nurse, with help from AI, will do better than the kids being on their own. So it will allow for a multiplicity of more gradual scenarios rather than, do I have a teacher and is that an excellent teacher? It's not easy to find in any country. So here, if you have a teacher, you're going to help them sophisticate. If you don't have a teacher, you have alternatives. Past that threshold, as I said, of connectivity. Sure.
In terms of the Bloom's taxonomy, and you mentioned it, what is the future of it? What do you think? Will the demands basically change to be checked in terms of everlasting changes?
Like the professor of computer science who was here, forgive me, I don't remember names very well, he said the devil is in the details, remember? The devil is in the details. just because it can synthesize doesn't mean it can synthesize well without hallucinations. It doesn't mean that it's the kind of synthesis that you want, right? If you say synthesize in 5 bullet points, fine. I mean, it does it. It does it reasonably well. But it's not necessarily, how can I say, gripping. It's very mushy wording. I don't know how to translate the word mushy. But it's like not great. It's just very, very average. So if you want a better synthesis, you may need to do more yourself. So you see, it's really at that detail level you have to think, not just the big words. Because otherwise, if you look at that table, I mean, at that column, and you look at all the technologies, you say, okay, we're done, we go home now. No, there's plenty to do. It's just that we have to be more sophisticated. Yeah. You have 2 people over there. Microphone.
Thank you very much. In your talk, in the last part, you mentioned about education and engineering. Maybe you know John Dewey's, he published in 1922 a short article about education as engineering. So he was mentioning about the mixing this or collaboration between education and engineering areas. In recent years, actually, there are some actions related to this one. For example, IEEE has a special group called as Learning Engineering Special Group. So, I mean, you just touched the topic. I mean, what do you think? Do we have to implement the engineering principles or engineering methodologies into the education area? Because there are some criticism about how do you bring the education and engineering? It is more mechanical or stuff, but there are counter arguments. We have to combine them together. So can you elaborate a little bit more on this? Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, they're telling me that we're out of time, so this is the last question. I apologize. So look, in 1920 whatever, in 1939, in 1945, there are people who talked about that, but they were talking about learning engineering, which is not education engineering, and I'm making that distinction. Learning engineering is, of course, the more quantitative aspect of education, and with these technologies, we're going to be able to measure a lot of things that are hard to measure by aggregating all sorts of data points and measuring longitudinally a student. That's learning engineering. What we're saying with education engineering is have the mindset of an engineer that wants to be precise in the definitions, that accepts an 80-20 rule rather than be paralyzed by perfection, right? Wants things to work fast, even sometimes if it has tape on it, as long as it holds. So we're not trying to be overly elegant. We're trying to be really effective and move things fast. We don't have time to waste. But also, you know, we haven't invented anything here. This has been discussed since Socrates and Aristotle, not just Dewey. But education systems have had a hard time implementing, right? So as an engineer, what am I doing? I'm showing how it can be implemented, right? We all have different baggage, different education baggages. Some help more on the humanities side, some help more on the STEM side. There's nothing wrong in the fusion of quantitative and qualitative approaches. We're never just going to take a number and salute and say, yeah, that's correct. We're always going to try to be mindful and always try to think with an and proposition, not an or proposition. Too often in science, you have people fighting each other with or propositions, whereas very often there's truth in various approaches. So we're trying to be wise in combining these things and not be dogmatic. This is not religion. We're not coming up with dogma. We're trying to come up with something that works. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Fadel, let's keep you on the stage for a while longer because I have a personal question that I'd like to ask you. You said that with new tech comes new fears. And I'm worried. I'm a news anchor for anyone who doesn't know, and I'm worried that AI is going to replace my job. I don't know, Jafar, are you worried as well?
Actually, this is something that Afna and I were discussing while listening to you from the backstage. And this question is purely based on curiosity and to basically plan ahead of time. How long before AI takes our jobs?
So what you've done is a perfect example of what journalism should not be. What you've done is lead with fear because you know that everyone paid attention. And what I'm saying is stop leading with fear. Lead with what can we do thanks to AI. Of course, evolution has wired us to be 10 times more sensitive to fear than to good news. And that's why everybody's news is all about bad things, because it gets people's attention. But I think you can ratchet it down a bit. We're tired, we're scared enough, help us feel better about ourselves and ask the positive questions of how are we going to help education with these things? How am I going to do my job better rather than how am I going to be replaced in my job?
Right. So being optimistic more than pessimistic.
That's quite relieving.
Great note to end on. All right. I want to now bring up to the stage the board member of the Turkish Marif Foundation, Dr. Mehmet Cangir.
Mr. Fadel.
Mr. Fadel, please, we'd like to give you a gift.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you go empty-handed. Come on. It's one of a kind. Turkish hospitality is one of a kind. Buyurun efendim. Perfect. All right, we're now going to take a 10-minute break, but of course, you can leave. I'm going to let you leave now.
Thank you very much.
We could take a short 10-minute break, and we'll be back to continue our program with our final panel of the day following our award ceremony. Please be back in 10 minutes, though. Thank you.